In our series on coaching, something that is near and dear to all of our hearts. And so we are hoping to really bring some great ideas when it comes to your current role in your district and how Strive can support that. All right, so our agenda for today is we're going to be talking about the big term that is so hot right now, lesson internalization. And then we're going to be walking through how Beacon can help. Then we're going to talk about Strive's role in that as well. And then we're going to look at our learner outcomes. So, Paige, tell us about lesson internalization.
All right. So we're going to start with the definition of lesson internalization. What is it? It describes the steps a teacher takes to intellectually prepare prior to a lesson or unit. My favorite part about this slide is where it says backwards planning design. I always quote Stephen Covey he always said, begin with the end in mind. And I do that on some things, but I don't think I always did that on my lesson plans. I think I wrote a lesson plan based on the scope and sequence, which should be kind of ordered the way the standard should go. But then after I wrote my lesson plan, then I would figure out what the assessment was and label the teaks that I had covered in that lesson. So I kind of did it the opposite direction of lesson internalization, which is to start with the standards and then break down and study the standards and go deeper before you actually put the steps and tasks together for the lesson. So that to me was the biggest takeaway on lesson internalization. And then I did link a couple things down in the bottom of the slides. When you see a link, Allison mentioned you'll get a follow-up email with a link to the recording. You'll also get the slide deck, and so you'll have access to these links when you get that information after 48 hours, maybe. Okay, so that's what lesson internalization is in a nutshell. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the details. The core steps of lesson internalization, and depending on the resource you look at, the names of these steps are a little bit different in different places, but they basically have the same steps there, just maybe they're calling them something different. The first one here is study and rehearse, and that's where you dig into the objectives, the key tasks, even the TEKs, and make sure that you know all the information before you even begin that planning process. And then the second one is work the work. That's where teachers actually walk through the student activities, whatever the tasks are going to be for students to do during the lesson, to see what it feels like on the learner side. What gaps did you see in the directions that you gave, or do you think that there are going to be any misconceptions, or are there any skills that you want to make sure that you check out before you start this activity? So it kind of helps teachers to be on that learner side of the practice. The next one is identifying critical components. That's, the big idea, the essential questions. What are those big things that you want to make sure you have in mind, that objective, all of that, before you start putting together the nuts and bolts. And then the next one is, I think, the biggest change for a lot of teachers, and that's annotating the lesson, marking it up before you actually start to teach that lesson. It might be that you're using a teacher guide, it might be that you're using a lesson plan that came from high quality instructional materials, or it might be a lesson plan that you or your team wrote, or a lesson plan that you've used in the past, but you're going to go through it and this time mark it up with some notes on these other elements. So notes about what gaps you saw in working the work, or notes on where you think there might be misconceptions. And so marking that lesson up with your individual notes is a change, I think, for a lot of teachers. And then finally, plan for learner variability. What scaffolds are you going to use for diverse learners? I know in my lesson plans, I always had a place at the bottom where I wrote modifications, and they were usually listed out by individual students. But in lesson internalization, the goal is to look for learner variability in each of the other steps. So as you're going through working the work, think about those kids that might need a scaffold there. So in each element, look at ways that you could annotate for that as well. So all of those are elements that kind of help explain. And then I also have a link at the bottom to a guide to lesson internalization. So instructional coaches can play a big role in helping teachers internalize their lessons. Um, One way to do that is by grouping your teachers together, creating professional learning communities, maybe by subject area, maybe by grade level. Maybe in a larger school, you have enough to do one subject and grade level and have all of the ninth grade language arts teachers together in one professional learning community. If you have a smaller campus, you may not be able to do it that granular, but you can still group those teachers together and work with them as a group instead of having to do all of that work individually. So, some core steps or core characteristics of effective professional learning communities is to make them safe so that teachers feel like they can work the work or talk about their concerns or ask questions, and be vulnerable, but still not feel that they're going to be under attack or that there's going to be any repercussions. To be collaborative so that the teachers are working together, especially when they're going through it for the first time and this is different. To be able to work together and share the ideas is very helpful. Making it relevant, keeping it focused on the students, the learner outcomes that we want to have and what we have to do to get there. And then finally, for it to be positive. And I think the first two, safe and collaborative, are probably what make it positive. Because if you feel comfortable, if you feel like you're helping and being helped, then that's going to be a positive experience for those teachers. So, both within PLCs and maybe even individually or smaller groups than that, what can instructional coaches do to impact lesson internalization? One thing is facilitating deep understanding, and that's the study and rehearse or identify critical components part of the steps of the process. So, looking at those objectives deeply, completing the student tasks, which would be the work section, and kind of digging into what that means and then identifying the why. So, talking about those things with the teachers, something that the instructional coach can help with. They can also help with the anticipating of student thinking and misconceptions. So, helping teachers to look at where students might have difficulty with a lesson, or once we've identified that, what scaffolding or differentiation can we put in place to help with that? And then the last one, developing exemplar responses, is a thing that I don't know that I did fully, to actually say, this is what I want the kids to be able to tell me. And if I don't get that answer, then what am I going to put in place to help get them to that answer? So, creating those exemplars is a thing that would be good for a PLC or for a coach to help them with and guide them. And then also leading the lesson rehearsals and practice. This part reminds me of my student teaching days, which was 100 years ago, but we had to practice. We had to teach lessons to each other in the class that we had during student teaching time, and also videotape ourselves and watch those videos. And that was very effective. But as soon as I got into the classroom, there wasn't a place or time to do that. A professional learning community might be that place or time where you could take on some of those practices of modeling, sharing, practicing, even recording and looking more closely at the lesson. And then the final one, providing feedback, might involve going in and observing and then talk about how the teacher did. They could provide that feedback in the practice lessons as well. And then ensuring fidelity and strategic adjustments. This one involves classroom visits because you want to see how the teacher is monitoring for pace, monitoring for flow. Are they, is the sequence good? Are the kids keeping up? And then connecting that, following up with that talk to the teachers about how their internalized lesson plan made a difference or what they could do differently for next time around. And then I have also added in here a sample lesson that has some of the elements of internalization in there. You'll notice it talks about beginning with the end, writing the goal first so that you have that plan. What do I want to get to at the end? Also highlighted in there are some markups or annotations. So this would be an example of what the teacher might add to the lesson or to whatever resource they're using, where they've taken that lesson, internalized it, put their own thoughts in there about what they should be looking for when the students are answering. And then the one at the bottom, the markup at the bottom, is about modeling. What am I going to do to model this kind of thinking with my kids? And then there's also one in the middle for planned scaffolding. So all of those are things that the teacher has annotated or marked up the lesson with things that they are specifically going to do to increase the depth of understanding. Okay, so now that we're talking about lesson plans, I'm going to hand off to Allison to talk about how Beacon can help.
Thanks, Paige. Okay, so let's talk about Beacon. So Beacon is our latest product here at Eduphoria. If you haven't heard of it, please talk to me. I'd love to tell you about it. So Beacon is our lesson planning solution here at Eduphoria. While it is replacing Forethought, while Forethought's still on for now, it is not, it is something completely different than Forethought. So it's easier navigation. It's a better view. It's a very much a streamlined process to get your teachers planning and give you the analytics as an administrator to support what's happening in your classrooms as well as tell your data story. So let's take a look at what this means in terms of coaching. First off, you can customize your templates in Beacon. So what you're looking at here on the left-hand side of the screen, or yeah, the left-hand side of your screen, is you're looking at a HQIM internalization template. This is something that we made in our demo site. And on the right-hand side is the actual template. So this is something you're like, oh, well, actually, I really like this, but I don't really like box five. Well, the thing about this is that you create this. So you can actually make a template that your teachers will use every day, or every other day. You can use a different template each day in Beacon, to map out and document their internalization of whatever content they are teaching. So when we're thinking about high quality instructional materials, things of that nature, we really want to have a daily lesson plan that reflects how we are internalizing the content in order to meet the needs of our students in our classroom. So as you can see, you can customize the template to have different looks, different boxes. You can even make it different colors, to really give you what you need to look at and know where your teachers are and where they're going with their planning. Let's talk about high quality instructional materials. So within Beacon, one thing that you are able to have added to Beacon, and this is completely complimentary, is the TEA's Bluebonnet Learning courses. And so what this is it is all K through 5 math, 6, 7, 8, and Algebra 1 math as well, the K through 3 foundational skills, as well as K through 5 ELA. And so those can be a part of your Beacon system. We add them in for you. And this is just a sample of what it looks like in what we like to call the course hub. And I know there's a lot of elements here on the page, so let me walk you through them. The very top, you're going to see that you've got your ALPS and your ELAR standards there. And when there is content within this course that addresses that standard, you have that at a glance look to see that you've got content within your course to cover your standards. Looking down, you see that you have your units of instruction, and then you also have the breakout of what standards comprise those units, as well as at a glance of how many lessons and how many resources are within that particular unit. In that middle panel there, you can see a little bit more of a granular look at each lesson that is provided inside of that unit, as well as the standards that are a part of that. And on that right-hand side, you're going to see what we like to call the relationship panel. I'm fully aware that sounds like something off of Love Island, but for this case, this tells you how everything relates to each other within this course. So you can see the units that comprise it as well as the resources. And then if this was a live interactive thing, I'd be able to show you the duration of days. So this is what a sample course looks like in Beacon as far on the course content creator end. So this is kind of the back end view that your teachers can see, but as the administrator, you're able to monitor and adjust as needed. Your teachers have a much more streamlined experience when planning where they can actually drag and drop the lessons into that internalization guide that you have for them in their planner, and they're able to do their lesson planning in that way. If I'm saying anything that dazzles you, let me know because I would love to give you a demo. And so let's talk about what all this means together. So we've got our we've got our high quality instruction materials. We have a planner or we have a template within our planner that helps us as teachers document what we were doing that day, how we're internalizing the content that is being taught. As an administrator, you have pretty much one of two ways to find out what's happening in your classroom. You can either go in and say, "Oh, hey, I'm going to do an observation to see where you're at and see and then go look at your lesson plans to see how you're planning. Or I can use your scope and sequence analysis tool in Beacon. And essentially what this does is as your teachers are planning, you'll see this screenshot here has a few look like fractions on there. But that is telling me for that instructional day, I have 3 out of the 7 preps in my school that teach this Algebra 1 course. 3 out of 7 of them are teaching the standards on the day they're supposed to. So I now know who is in alignment and who maybe needs to have some questions asked about where are you, what's going on, how can I help you? On that right-hand side, if you clicked on one of those standards, you would actually be able to see which teachers or which preps and the teachers that teach them are the ones that are within alignment or the ones that are out of alignment, or one that is teaching the standard but not teaching it within that scope and sequence. So you're able to see within a matter of minutes very easily without having to go and conduct a walkthrough and then gather your data and then go back and have a conversation. As an administrator, you're able to get that one-stop shop of, oh, this is what is happening in my classroom. And now I can go, okay, if I have my assessment results from Aware in that I'm analyzing, I can now go look at a historic view of what was taught with this view here in scope and sequence, I can see when certain standards were hit. Did we teach the standards within this current unit and the assessment was given directly afterwards? And I can also see what reteaching happened. Did we talk about it? Did we perform some sort of retrospective look with my students to see where we needed to strengthen and where we needed to celebrate our areas of achievement? So as you can see, Beacon really gives you that full data story of what happened before, during, and after the assessment, as well as really quick ways that you as a coach can go in and say, oh, this is what I need to go focus my attention on. Because yes, as an administrator, you have about 30 seconds to make each decision. Sometimes you don't even have that long. And so it's really good to be able to go and say, oh, this is where I need to focus my time first. And then I can also make sure I reach everyone I need to as well. So if anybody knows where there's a pot of gold that has time in it, let us know. But as far as I know, time-saving tools and tips like this one are game changers for our administrators. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Shanna.
Before we jump
Oh,
over to the next section, we have a question that I wanted to pose to you live. So the question is the scope and sequence inter-district level? Then that is reference point to determine what teachers are teaching based on the learning plan. So is it done at the district level, the scope and sequence?
I'm sorry, my audio cut out there, Paige. One more time.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
So is the scope and sequence entered at the district level and
Yes.
then used as a reference point for the teachers for what they're teaching based on the learning plan?
Yes. So can you back up one slide?
Yes, I can. Maybe I can.
All
There we go.
right, there we go. So as you can see here, though, on that the units that we're looking at, you can see that you set the scope and sequence as a district content course creator. And so when you start putting in the units that comprise your course, you can actually move them around. So let's say that, you know what, we're actually, for this example, we really want to address Eureka, the art of invention before we dig into personal narratives. You can just drag and drop that, shift that unit around. You can also fluctuate the days. So if we have a bad weather day, or if there is something that needs to be adjusted district wide, you can also fluctuate that. So all those elements affect the scope and sequence. So yes, that is created at the district level, and then the teachers are able to see it in their planners. Great question.
Thank you very much for that answer. And I'm going to start off. with how Strive can help, and then I'm going to pass it to Shanna in just a few minutes. So I want to talk about some resources that we have when you're talking about lesson internalization. The first thing is an observation and a summative that allows for the language of lesson internalization. If not every teacher in your district is using that language, if some of them are still writing their lesson plans, I mean, they can write their lesson plans and still do lesson internalization. So it's a district choice. But if you have some who are and some who are not, we do have a combined document. We have it in the observation and the summative, where the appraiser would check whether this teacher, whether they were being evaluated for lesson internalization or whether they were being evaluated for designing lessons, because the language is different. And so once I determine for this teacher that they're being evaluated in this observation with the language of lesson internalization, then I can see that language in the document as I script my evidence and go in and make my ratings. So what this does for you is it keeps all the data in one place. So you're not splitting into two documents and separating your data between the regular t-test and the Alt D1 t-test. It's all together in one place. For some of the data analysis, that means you don't have to look at it two different places and try to combine. It's all going to be together because you're using the same document. This document is in the Eduphoria community. The title of it is up here at the top. It says V2 observation descriptors from both. So that's the name of the observation one. The summative one, I think, is named the same. It just says T-Test V2 summative, but we do have both of them so that the documents match exactly. And you can pull those from the Eduphoria community if you need to. I also have a link there for how you can get things out of the community if you've never been there before. And we do try to keep things out there that would be helpful as things change with the state and all the processes. We also have the observations that are part of the Bluebonnet program that the state has created. So if you are using that and you're using those lessons, there are walkthroughs for each of those different levels that Allison mentioned, and we have them in the walkthrough section. You can go and download those. I did put a little reminder here. Anytime you go to the community, you want to make sure that you click that green circle. That's the refresh button. The community is kind of chunky, so it doesn't auto refresh every time you log in. But if you need something from there, you want to click that button to make sure you're getting the most up-to-date things that we've put out there. And then finally, we have a lesson internalization walkthrough. This one is not Bluebonnet specific or any kind of anything specific. It is just a walkthrough that kind of looks at some of the elements of lesson internalization and identifies how the teacher is doing there. It primarily aligns with planning and instruction. So that's where you're going to see those questions for the teachers. And so this one you can't really tell until I'm live, but if I clicked that little checkbox, it would open up a text box below it for me to say, if I said the teacher's internalization demonstrates how lessons map objective maps to the specific TEKS, I would have a box to say, this is what they did that lets me know they did that. So I would have a place to put some examples for the things that I checked off, and then I can give feedback for each one of the dimensions as I go through that document. So it just gives them a place to observe what the teacher is doing and use that as a walkthrough. It is tied to t-test dimensions so that you can see the data in that way, but it is not meant to be a t-test evaluation because it's not the complete, it's just the pieces that are related to lesson internalization. And then finally, you can create your own templates. So if you don't find anything in the community that meets your needs specifically, you can always build something yourself. And so I added a link at the bottom to form management, which walks you through finding where your forms live, and then creating a new form if you wanted to. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Shanna to talk about Strive from the product side.
Well, and to start off, this is just to kind of before we blend into the new information, those forms that Paige was just talking about, you can include those coaching forms in your evaluation process by adding, you can either have a separate step for the instructional walkthroughs or those walkthroughs that you have that you're using for your coaching. Or you could have a separate task. I've seen districts also use it as like you have a walkthrough step, but you have a separate task for the non-evaluative walkthroughs. So you could have those. In that case, you could, with those forms, you would assign your coaches the walkthrough creator right, and then they would have access to create and view those, but only the things that they create and view. And even though it is in the evaluation process, they would not be able to see anything else. They are only able to see those things that they created. And that works, and that's a perfectly good solution. However, so the next slide page, we also, since it is in the formal evaluation process and it is tied to accountability and employment decisions, which often carries an element of pressure. As Paige mentioned earlier, in the instructional coaching relationship is non-evaluative. It's built on trust. We want teachers to feel comfortable and be open, reflective, and vulnerable. And we don't want teachers to worry about any HR implications. Sorry, that was a hard word for me today. But we are exploring the option for teachers, or to introduce an option to have more than one process. So right now, you can only have one formal evaluation process, but we're exploring, maybe introducing the option to have something like a coaching process that would just be a partnership between the coach and the teacher, completely separate. Next page, or next slide page. So, for example, this coaching process would have its own steps and tasks, and it would be completely separate of the evaluation process. We've even had some districts that have requested, we want a coaching situation where principals or evaluators, formal evaluators, don't have access to this, because it is that relationship, that very specific. You want the teachers to feel vulnerable and be able to try things and do things. It's non-evaluative. It's not a part of that situation with the HR. So I mentioned we are exploring this idea. So really, I would love to get some feedback from if this is something that you would be interested in implement, like if this is something that you would use or you could see using in your district. I would love for you to type or drop a note in the webinar chat area, just thinking that, if this is something that might interest you, and how important it is to have that separation of the two, or this. All right. Anyone? Nobody wants to drop a note in? Okay. Yeah. So I'm also going to throw it out there. If there's like, yeah, I'm interested, but I have questions and I want to talk to you about it more, I also want to open the floor as we continue. There's a part at the end of this that you'll be able to fill out some specific, like a questionnaire if you want to drop your specific needs. But we're also we're open to having some one-on-one conversations if there are things, because, we want some feedback from you. How can we help in this process with the coaching? So, all right. Okay, so moving on. So the next thing is, this is not something we're exploring. This is something that we are full on doing. Our developers have been working for the past 6 or 7 months on completely revamping the user experience for building forms and building a process. We are looking to release this at the beginning of the summer. We want to wait until after districts complete the current year, the current cycle year, and archive. When we do release, it will basically migrate all of your existing forms and processes to the new user interface. So, but we want to do this. We want to make sure you have time to review and to play with it, and to make sure that your process is updated for the 26-27 school year. And I do want to mention that the biggest impact is going to be on appraisal administrators. Those of you that are building forms or editing forms or building your process, updating those due dates and things like that. This is going to be big for you guys, and the impact to the evaluators will be minor, and it will be a streamlined experience. It will be a much easier experience for them. So that's I just wanted to call that out. This is going to be big for those of you that are dealing with creating all the back end stuff. One of the biggest changes, next slide page, you'll notice we have the same options for questions, but we've updated, right? So we had a group of check boxes that we would use in the existing forms for like checking multiple things. And then if you wanted to create a single select, you would use a matrix question. And so now we're introducing the idea of single or multiple selection. And it's so if you want to have a yes no question, you could choose a single selection question type, and you can have a yes no right here. So this is definitely an improvement. We've also included the option to have the text input right there. That's a part of that. So it's all kind of one. It's not a separate action. The next one is the ability, and this is huge for coaching when we're talking about coaching and how important it is. The biggest request we've had is wanting to have that back and forth communication. Right now, in the reflection documents, we have an option for appraisers to comment, and we have regular comments, but we want to be able to do that in any form. So in any form, you'll be able to have the person filling out the form, and then you can also assign it to the second party. So then you've got this back and forth ongoing communication. So this will be huge, I think, as you're adding those coaching forms along the way. And then finally, just your overall experience in building forms will be extremely delightful. If you've built forms in our current form builder, I feel
It is not extremely delightful.
you're going to love this, but most importantly, forms will not only how it'll be much more delightful, but the forms will have more options, more item types, updated, signature experience, better scoring options, and a lot more. So this is kind of my side note plug, as we'll be sending out more detailed information as we get closer to the end of the year. And if you have questions or would like a one-on-one sneak peek, we're looking for feedback, so we would love to chat with you. So don't hesitate to reach out and send a message. You can send it into Paige at training@eduphoria.net or whatever, and they can get the message along to us. But and I also mentioned that questionnaire at the end about your coaching needs. Be sure and fill that out, because as we are revamping again some of these processes, I mean, we're looking at how we can make your life easier. So
As someone who creates a lot of templates for the Eduphoria community, I cannot express how excited I am for the new form builder. I think it's going to be fabulous.
cannot wait.
All right, so let's talk about learner outcomes. In lesson internalization, that's where we're supposed to start, is what do we want the kids to be able to do, to demonstrate, to learn, and then how do we know if we got there? So we looked at some ways to plan for that and to monitor it as we're going through. We looked at ways that teachers can be evaluated to see if they're doing all the things, but we need to look at the student data to see where we are. And so you always have quick views, multiple quick views that you can look at to see if you are meeting those goals. In this case, it's a quick view that is a summary by school, and it has highlighted the standards that are met, did not meet, met, or mastered. So I can see where we are in terms of that information, and I can see it by school. I could drill down. I could look at individual teachers. I could look at individual students within those classes. So if you are someone who has worked with Aware in the past, you know there are a lot of different views that you can use to find the information. You can even compare two different tests side by side and look at specific standards to see we targeted these TEKs with lesson internalization strategies. what change did that make in student performance over the course of that year or the course of that semester or what have you. So lots of different ways that you can look at that data in Aware. I did put a link in there to the quick views section. There are some built-in quick views that are there for everybody, and then you can always build your own. So just remember, you can look at the data that way to kind of monitor how well we did with all those strategies that we put in place. And then you can also look at the correlation between your student growth data and your teacher performance data from their evaluations. So you can go in and add student growth data into Strive, and then your teacher evaluations obviously are already in Strive. You can look at either observation data from the teachers or summative. In this example, it's looking at summative data. But if you have middle of the year student data, you can upload that, compare that to observations, and then at the end of the year, upload end of the year student data, compare that to summatives, and you can see if there are changes for the teachers or for the students throughout that time. So you can kind of see, are we seeing a better correlation between the teachers' evaluations and their student scores after they have applied some of these new strategies using lesson internalization? Has that made a difference? So you can come in and look at the data to try to figure that out for your district. All right, any final questions? I'm not seeing, well, maybe I'm not seeing any in Q&A right now. But feel free if you have a question to put that out there. And I'll check again before we leave. But this is a link to the questionnaire that Shanna mentioned earlier. You can snap it on your phone right now if you got your phone sitting by you and grab that QR code and submit some information to us right now. Or if you want to think about it a little bit, in 48 hours when you get the slide deck, you will have this QR code as a link there as well. So you can go in, and the URL for it is down at the bottom. If you don't have your camera, but you want to do it right now, there's the link. And so this is going to help us get information about what you're looking for, what your needs are, and how we can best meet those needs. Shannon, do you want to say anything else about the questionnaire?
No, that's mainly it. We just, we can help you if you help us know
We
what you need.
always, absolutely, we always appreciate feedback from customers. This survey is one way that you can give us feedback. You can also send an email to support@eduphoria.net requesting a feature that you would like to see. And that's something that we like to hear from customers. What are you looking for? What are your needs? And then finally, I mentioned this earlier, our free resources for teachers. These are short 3 to 5 minute videos on all different topics in Aware, Strive, and Beacon. And you can use them to train teachers. Like there's one for beginning of the year, how to update their profile. And it's just a quick video. You can either send them the link or you can take them to that site or you can use it in a training situation, but it just gives them a quick way to go in and do the tasks that they need to do. And so that's very helpful for teachers and you have access to it. So take advantage of it. Thank you very much for your time. And please fill out the questionnaire so that we can figure out what it is that we need to do next.
Thanks,
Thank
y'all.
you.